Hello makers, it is time for another episode in our Fabric Masterclass series, and today we're looking at Dupion. Dupion is a woven fabric with a slub or textured surface, and it's usually used for occasion wear. We'll go into a little bit more detail in the video and I'll show you and compare some different types of Dupion. Today our video is linked to our fabric guide. This is a comprehensive guide to 70 of our most popular base cloths. Inside you'll get, in the first chapter, lots of information about how fabric is made, the differences between stretch and woven fabrics. In the second chapter there's really useful information about fibre types, so if you know what your fabric is made of, what fibre content it has, that will give you some information about how it will behave. This is particularly interesting with Dupion because you tend to have two camps of Dupion fabric: a natural fibre collection and a synthetic fibre collection. They will both behave differently, so you'll need to know for your project which one you might like to choose. In the final chapter of the book you can go to the Dupion page and you can get specific information about this fabric type. You'll get a pack of 70 different fabric swatches to put in your book, and that means you can handle the fabric and decide if it's the one you need for your project. Let's take a closer look at the Dupion page. Dupion has a difficulty rating of 3 out of 5, and that's purely because you'll be working with the sheen and the luster of the fabric and making sure that you use the grain in the correct way so that you've got the texture working how you want it to. You can get two different types, the synthetic type or the silk type. There's some information here about the fibres details, some sewing information and a recommended needle, which today is a 70. You've also got your swatch, and this is a different Dupion to these two. This one is a Shantung, and a Shantung Dupion has a much smoother surface. So it's still got ridges on it, but it's not quite as textured as these two. Dupion is a woven fabric, and there's a synthetic version and a natural fibre version, and I want to show you them close up so that you can see the differences. This first fibre is a silk version, so you've got quite irregular slubs on here, and you'll get a real movement in the dark and light areas, and that's what makes this fabric really superb, especially if you choose the right pattern. Anything with pleats or gathers or twists, they all highlight that dark and light area in the silk. You might hear that it's got a slightly sort of papery feel, and it's also got a structure that holds its shape. So for puff sleeves or voluminous areas, it's a really useful fabric. A synthetic fabric has slightly more drape, so it's not quite as crisp as the silk one, but you still get those light and dark areas. It behaves in the same way, and it still holds its shape and has some structure. The one that I'm using today has a satin back, so even the satin reverse has very faint and subtle ridges in it, so you'll still get a little bit of texture, more than you would with a Duchess satin, which would be completely smooth, because the slub texture from this side moves to this side. So this one doesn't particularly have a right or wrong side, that's for you to make your choice. All Dupions fray. The synthetic one not as much as the silk one. The silk one frays a little bit faster, so you'll need to think about how you're going to finish it. This one is ideal for gathers or for jacket making. This one in synthetic fibre doesn't hold its creases the same as the silk one, so if you were sat down in the silk one and then you stood up, the creases would remain, whereas with the synthetic one they would start to drop out over time. In this same category is a Shantung silk, so this one is smoother, so it still has ridges, it's a little bit lighter in weight, and it has the satin back finish. Dupion, or Dupioni, which is its real name, Dupion is a shortened version, is a fabric that has a slub texture. And that slub texture comes from weft threads which are tangled together originally in silk, and then they are woven through the warp threads which are smooth. So sometimes you'll get a two-tone taffeta where the warp threads are one colour and the weft threads that are tangled together are another colour, and you'll get a sort of hue between two different colours. You also get that level of iridescence by just having a smooth thread on the warp and the tangled threads on the weft, and that's where that little texture of the fabric comes from. It's why people choose it, because they want to have a natural feel and they want to really highlight the iridescence of the light and dark areas. One of the best ways to understand how a fabric behaves and what it can be used for is to check out our Minerva makers and see what they have been making. You will see that Dupion is used mostly for special occasion wear, dresses, suits, jackets. I couldn't find any men's inspiration, but I know it makes superb waistcoats, bow ties, cummerbunds, all of those kinds of things for a special occasion. Let's take a look at some garments from our Minerva makers. You can use this fabric for casual styles like tops and shirts. These are both the Shantung Dupion. You can use simple dress designs, modern dress designs, or outright party dresses. This fabric is also used for cosplay for its shiny texture. Dupion looks great in jackets with lots of details, or just a really simple bolero to finish off a vintage style. Dupion can also make suits, both trousers and jackets and blazers. Or you could be using your Dupion to layer up with another fabric like lace, with other colours of Dupion, or you can add embellishments like this jumpsuit with feathers. Dupion doesn't have to be really over the top. You can use it to make really quite simple style dresses, or you can go all out. This is the silk Dupion, where it's made into two beautiful evening dresses. If you're outfitting for a special occasion, then Dupion also makes great accessories like handbags, headbands and accessory jackets. Today I'm going to be making a top from Burda 6516. I know that this top fits because I've made the jumpsuit part of this pattern. You might have seen this in one of my jumpsuit videos. So this is the sleeveless version. It's belted, it has belt loops, pockets, a zip at the back. And I know that the upper part of this body fits because I did a few alterations to the pattern. So I thought I would make the top that is also on this pattern. But today, using the Dupion, I want to use the satin back Dupion so that you can see the effect of using one side of the fabric for one part of the pattern and one side for another. This is a really useful feature of the satin back Dupion because you won't have to try and find a colour match if you want a different textural finish. The back makes really good belts or sashes, while your main fabric is the slub side. So I'm going to utilise both sides of the fabric in today's top. Today's top isn't a full sew along, so you won't see me make it from start to finish, but you will see me putting in a zip, switching the fabric around, and I'll show you all of the sewing and finishing. Dupion isn't difficult to sew or cut, but it is tricky to fit because there's absolutely no give in this fabric at all. So shoulders need to be fitted correctly. You might get a gaping neckline if you haven't got the correct pattern fit for you, and especially around the hips and the waist you won't have any give in the fabric at all. So when you're making anything in Dupion, it's probably a good idea to make a toile first. Then you can use that toile to cut out your main pattern pieces. When you're cutting Dupion, you need to make sure that you have got the slub lines and the texture lines going in the direction that you want them to. So you can play around with that. So you can have some, if you've got a panelled top, you can have some of them going in one direction and some going in another, because there's no give on either end of the grain, whether it's crosswise or lengthwise. So you need to either make that intentional or make sure you don't make a cutting error. For me, I'm using the back of this fabric for the satin back feature, so I need to be just aware that I'm making sure that I cut that out correctly. Because my peplum piece that goes around the bottom of my top is cut on the bias, then I'm also needing to make sure that I really cut on the bias, because there's no other give in this fabric, only that mechanical stretch against the bias, and it's not massive, so I need to make sure that I definitely get the right angle. On a silk Dupion, you probably won't be able to tell the difference between the right side and the wrong side, so you need to make sure that when you're putting your pieces together, if you need a left and a right front, for example, or a left and a right sleeve, that you get the same finish on both sides. With this satin backed Dupion, it's quite obvious which is going to be a right side and a wrong side, and you need to choose that at the start of your cutting. So I'm going to use the dull side for the top of my blouse, and I'm going to use the shiny side as the peplum. On the selvage, the fabric has no give at all, but it doesn't have any give on the cross grain either. So quite often with a woven fabric, you'll get a little bit of give across there, but it's absolutely stable in both directions. So I need to make sure that I am choosing my textured rib lines to be going in the same direction for all of the pattern pieces, or however I want to design my top. So I'm going to have the lines running down my body. So from neck to hem, I want the ribs to be running down. So I need to make sure that I place my pattern pieces in that direction, and also that I then put the next pattern pieces the same. I'm also doing the same for the sleeve. However, the peplum piece is asking me to cut this on the bias so that it drapes around my hips. I'll have a little bit more give around my hips. So for this pattern piece, I'm going to fold my fabric with a 45-degree angle. Now I can place the peplum piece on the fold, and you can see that my grain line is now running in the same direction as the ribs in the fabric. So just be aware, if any of your pattern pieces ask you to go off the grain line, that you're still doing that in Dupion. And it does have a bias on it, but it's not massive. It doesn't feel as pliable as in, say, challis, for example. So you need to make sure if it needs movement, you're getting that movement by being accurate with your 45-degree fold. I had the same with the peplum back. So now, because I've cut it on a bias, then my ribs are slanted on my fabric, and I like that. But if that's not your intended look, then you might need to have a fabric that doesn't have the ribs so prominent. So you might choose a Dupion Shantung, which is a smoother finish. My sleeves are cut with the ribs going straight, and I've also made sure that my facing pieces are cut on the straight grain so that they stabilise the neckline. They're all points to consider because it very much depends what garment you're making and what effect you would like to achieve. We are going to sew up some samples of the fabric. I'm also going to be making my top along the way, so you'll see little bits of my top coming together. I've got a new 70 needle in my machine because I don't want the fabric to snag. So a finer needle than a normal 80 will just pierce through the fabric a little bit more easily. I've got my machine on stitch length 2.5. If you go longer, then your fabric will pucker up and your seams will pucker up, which is particularly noticeable on satin. So take your stitch length down to 2.5 or 2. You can back tack and you can try your test piece. This is what you're trying to avoid because the fabric is puckering a little bit here, and especially if I'm looking for the satin side, I'll see that it's a little bit lumpy and it's just puckering the fabric. To avoid this, you can change the tension. So I'm going to loosen my tension off, just take it below 4. This has reduced it a little bit. You do get a little bit of puckering with this fabric because it's got a really light feel. and then you can press your seams open. I find that cutting Dupion with pinking shears just gives me enough handling time until I get round to finishing it. So I would use the pinking shears as a sort of temporary stop from it fraying. If you're lining something, you can probably leave it with that pinking shear edge. So if you've got a boned bodice, for example, then you might use this method. Or if you are going to have this as your finishing, then you'll need to think about what you're going to do. You can turn your fabric once. This is a neat way to finish your edges, and when you press from the right side, it won't create too much bulk or make a pattern through the fabric. You can zigzag it, but I wouldn't recommend it on this fabric because it's so light, it will sort of pucker it together between the zigzags. I'll show you what I mean. You don't get a clear zigzag, it does pull the fabric, and when you've pressed the seam, you can see this side has been zigzagged and this side has been straight stitched, and although we can see the straight stitching line, it's neater and smoother and it looks more intended than this line here, which looks quite lumpy. I'll show you a few techniques for pressing afterwards where you can eliminate that line a little bit. You can overlock the edges if you have an overlocker. This will give a really good finish on the inside. It will stop it fraying, and it means that your fabric is easy to handle when you're putting all your pieces together. If you're getting this, then you need to change your diff feed. So this one was on diff feed 1 and it's nice and flat, whereas this one up here was on diff feed 0.7 and it's just ruching up the fabric. So always do a little test before you start putting your fabric under the machine for your main garment. If you're using a silk Dupion and you're getting quite a bit of fraying, then some people add a little bit extra to their seam allowance, so they make sure their seam allowances are very generous 1.5 centimetres. When you pin your fabric, if you use pins that are too thick, then especially in the satin one, you'll get little pin marks in your fabric and you can see them there. So it's a good idea when you're pinning to use a lightweight pin. These are lace pins or silk pins, and pin within the seam allowance. Depending on which fibre type Dupion you have, you will need to adjust your pressing and any kind of washing accordingly. If you've got a silk Dupion, then you'll be really thinking about either dry cleaning so that you don't lose the luster of the fabric, or just spot cleaning or hand washing where you've had it against your skin. With the polyester one, then it's a little bit easier because you can wash that at low temperatures and it doesn't crease the same. It's got a smoother texture. It's always a good idea to test a little piece of your fabric before you press anything on your main pattern pieces. So use a press cloth. To press out your fabric. You can see there I've got a few little wrinkles, and that's because that's the side with the zigzag on. If I don't want to get this line here where the other seam finishes, then you can cover up that seam finish with your press cloth so that you make a sandwich. So there's a press cloth here covering the edge of the fabric so you don't get the imprint on the side that you want. This is the side with the straight seam finish. This is the side with the zigzag. Depending on the fibre type of your fabric, you'll need to choose the correct setting. So if you're on silk, choose silk. If you've got a synthetic fabric, turn your iron down. If you're adding interfacing, then you'll also need to use a press cloth because you might not be able to iron your fabric from the right side. So use the press cloth to apply the glue, and here don't drag the iron, just press. That way you don't smooth the interfacing off. the shiny surface of the fabric. Silk and shantung doesn't need a strong interfacing, it needs an interfacing the same weight as the fabric, so make sure you pick something light. You can get a crisp press on Dupion, so if you've got side darts you can press those out. Ham helps to get the shape because you can't blend the fabric the way you can with other woven fabrics, so you need to be careful you don't get sort of shiny tips to the end of your darts. In my case I've got some tucks, so I want to press those, but I want to do it softly. So I'm going to add steam and press by hand. That way I'll have set the fabric, but I won't have made a funny dimple right near my bust apex. So that is a really soft press here. On my seams, I've overlocked mine together because I'm not lining my top at all. I'm going to press those from the wrong side and the right side. So you might need a firm press for your side seams, or you might need a soft press for pleats and features. If you're working with the different sides of the satin Dupion, you just need to be a little more mindful when you're piecing your parts together that you're getting your chosen right sides and wrong sides in the correct places. I need the shiny side of my peplum touching the textured side of my bodice. This fabric doesn't create layers and bulk really quickly, so you can join multiple pieces together without the worry of having to layer out, which is great because the fabric frays, so you don't want to be recutting it, you want to keep your finished edge. In order to keep your zip in place, you can use some basting tape that will hold everything down. It's a temporary glue and it just means that you don't have any pins in the way, or you could tack your zip. I've used an invisible zip today, but you could try other zip techniques with Dupion. They all work quite well. You can follow some tutorials for that over on Minerva's YouTube channel. There's lots of different styles there for you to check out. Because there is no give in the fabric, then you'll be needing to clip around the corners. You don't necessarily need to layer it out because it's not bulky. The tight weave just means that you want to be able to turn your facings or any curved stitching to get everything to lie flat, and I really recommend understitching for areas around necklines where you want everything to make a smooth curve. You can see here I've got a really smooth neckline. It took more clipping than I thought, so I did need to clip at shorter distances apart because the fabric doesn't have much pliability. It's structured and crisp. Then I did actually need to go back to just here because I had one tiny stitch that was just pulling the facing. You can see it was there, and it was just making the front of my neckline a little bit puckered. So that's where the difficulty rating comes in with this fabric. It's hard to press and handle, it's not so hard to sew. Because the fabric has absolutely no stretch whatsoever, if you need to ease in a piece of fabric, so if one part of your garment is larger than another piece that you're attaching it to, you'll need to use a lot of pins. So I'm putting in the sleeves in my top. I'm not expecting them to go in perfectly, so I'm going into it with a little bit of trepidation because I know that around this sleeve head, ordinarily I would sort of ease the fabric a little bit and stretch the weave open over the shoulder. I can't do that, so I'm going to need lots and lots and lots of pins, and I'm also going to tack it. When I say a lot of pins, I mean a lot of pins, and I'm going to sew it from the inside so that I can check whether I'm going to be making any puckers as I go along, and I'm also going to be using my fingers on the foot plate to see if I can feel any puckers as I'm sewing. I'm going to tack it so I can be doubly sure that everything stays in place. I'm at the hemming stage now, and I think it's worth noting that depending on what you're making and where you're hemming, you might need to switch up your techniques. So if you stitch by hand, which I have on this silk Dupion, you'll need to be really careful that you only pick up a tiny thread. It was easier on the silk to hand sew than it is onto the polyester, because the texture is a little more bumpy, so you can hide your stitches in there. So you'll need a matching thread, absolutely matching. And if you do hand stitch and you're going to see that little pickup on the right side, then make sure that your stitches are an equal width apart. So that is on the silk. Today on my top, I'm going to use a narrow edge hem, but you might want to choose any kind of hemming technique that suits your project. So you can check that out on our hemming video. There's a ribbon edged hem, a narrow hem, a single folded hem, a double folded hem, a hand stitched hem. They're all there for you to go and choose from. So this is the top. I've actually made this sleeve shiny as well, so that it didn't look like I just put the peplum on the wrong way around. You can play with those different fabric types. It's got pleats, a really smooth neckline, and that's from all the clipping that happened around that neckline and the understitching. And it can be worn as a party top, or you could also make this pattern in other colours and prints. If you would like to explore more fabric types, then take a look at the Minerva fabric guide. There's a couple of videos that support this, so you can have a more in-depth look and a chat about it. There's one with Vicky and there's one with me, and we both take you through what's inside the guide. It gives you lots of information about how fibres are made, knit fibres, stretch fibres, and some considerations for if you're buying fabric online. The next section of the book is an index of all different fibre types. So if you understand what fibre your fabric is made out of, then you'll understand more about the characteristics of it and whether it will suit a particular project or not. The last section is the section where you'll have 70 little swatches to put into your book, like a little sticker book. The QR code is really handy, because if you scan the QR code, then boiled wool will be filtered to your page. So if you think, oh, I really fancy making something with this, and I think I can do all of these things, or it's something I want to explore, it will filter it down so that there's only boiled wool in your search. So that is the Minerva fabric guide. If you're on the lookout for some special occasion fabric, then Dupion is definitely worth exploring. It's got that high luster and sheen, and the advantage that you can get highlights where you get creases and folds. I hope you found today's video useful, and do come back and join us for more of the Fabric Masterclass series. If you've been making anything, then we would love to see what you have been up to. So do make a free account over at Minerva, share your makes there, and give us a little description of what you've been up to. It really does inspire our Minerva makers, and we love to see what you've been making. Thank you very much for watching. Do call for more of this series.